The Flyover Libertarian, Episode 1.
Hey, what's up? This is the Flyover Libertarian podcast, where two unimportant people from an unimportant place give you the opinion that you didn't ask for. I'm Josh, aka IO ANCAP.
And I'm the Rural Rothbard. Today we're talking about origin stories, both for the page and our own politics.
Right on. Like you said, we're going to be talking about our origin stories. You know, we're hoping this is going to be a podcast with like segments and stuff like that. But just for this first time, you know, that sounded like a lot of work. When we're just trying to figure out how to podcast. So we thought it'd be a really good idea just to talk about how we came to libertarianism, what this page is all about and where it came from, and all that goodness. So, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So how I came to libertarianism. This is a really long story, and I am already given, if you haven't noticed from some of my monologues, I'm given to long stories. But it all starts with, I grew up I wouldn't have called myself this, but I was a neocon. My dad, I think, still has sort of neoconish sensibilities, but I was pretty solidly Republican. I remember being, in youth group, a good evangelical youth group kid, and we went to this conference, and we were talking about how we needed to support George W. Bush, or otherwise this country was going to go to hell and all that stuff, and so I defended the Iraq War and everything like that. But then I went to college, and when you go to college, you interact with other ideas and other people and stuff like that. And I remember reading, it was on Zanga. You remember that? Remember Zanga? Did you ever have that? It's like a blogger site.
No, I'm a lot younger than you.
That's true. Zanga, it was like a proto Facebook. It was just a blog site. And I remember someone making an argument on there where he had made this comment about the Patriot Act that I found really I hated it when I read it, because I also have to say, when the Ron Paul Giuliani moment happened, I was Team Giuliani.
Oof.
I say that with great sorrow and shame. But he had made this comment about the Patriot Act, where he said, all right, George, let's say you are such a nice guy and you can be trusted with all this power to spy on your own people and all that stuff. Like, let's say you can be trusted with this. What about the next guy? How do we know that the next guy is going to be trustworthy? And even more than I think that Ron Paul moment, which I would say that even though I was on Team Giuliani, that stuck in my mind for a while. That little phrase that came from this friend who, by the way, has not stuck to his guns, because as soon as it came out that Obama was spying on us, fell strangely silent. But that little phrase of what about when the next guy gets it? That really started my journey to becoming what I am today, an anarcho-capitalist. But along the way, I actually just ditched politics altogether. So in my day job, I work for the church. I'm a pastor, and I went to seminary. And while I was in seminary, I decided I was going to just do a political fast. So I was just completely out of politics. I paid no attention to I forget which year. What election was that? The Obama second term, 2012, I think it was. I paid no attention to any of that election cycle. I heard about it later.
And you didn't miss a thing.
Didn't miss a thing. I feel really sad that I miss out on all that.
Mitt Romney is just such an inspiring conservative figure, you know.
I
so
know.
Principled.
I wish I'd been able to, but but during that time, a couple things happened. First of all, I had always known that the left was incredibly groupthinky. I remember thinking, like, what holds all of these things together? Like, I had been told that they were called liberals because they believed in a liberal interpretation of the Constitution, but I couldn't figure out what that had to do with homosexuality, abortion, immigration. Like, there was a lot of things that I'm like, I don't get how this all holds together. But then as I stepped out of the political right, I started seeing the same sort of things, right? Like, why is it that a conservative view of the Constitution means you also should be pro-life? Or you also have to be against gay marriage, or you also have to be pro-war. Like, there were so many things that just didn't make sense. And in fact, now I see that not only did they not make sense from just a groupthink perspective, it actually, if you're a constitutionalist, you should be anti-war, because so much of this is very anti-constitutional. But the other thing that was going on, as I was seeing sort of the hypocrisy on both sides, I started coming to more of a theological position, coming to my theological roots and figuring out what I believed about God, the Bible, where I saw myself in the church. And as I did, I started seeing the importance of principles, that it was important that in any ideology or thought process be based on principles. Like, it's one thing if I looked at someone and I said, I know exactly what you believe because of what you are. It's one thing if that's because I just know that you're just a thoughtless drone following after everyone else. But it's another thing if I know what you're going to say about a given topic because I know your principles and I know that you hold to those principles. So I was seeing that as I was emerging from what I call my political cocoon, and I was starting to come into political, or I guess I was researching my political options. I came out and I just sort of naturally, because that's how I always was, came out and tried to become conservative again. But it was really hard because I was seeing all these inconsistencies and I was seeing the lack of principles underlying it. Of course, now I also know there's more types of conservative than just neoconservative, but that's all I knew. But before I got into my political cocoon, I had started reading a little bit of Reason magazine. I started listening to Cato Institute, and I started becoming interested in libertarianism. But one thing that I had noticed was it was really hard for me to be the type of libertarian they wanted me to be and still hold to the biblical and theological principles that I thought were very important. Because, and this is something that I've always been very careful about as I've been trying to work with people to help them understand politics, is the truth was I was not going to leave behind my religious beliefs. I wasn't going to leave those behind. And so whatever I believed had to have principles to stand on, and it had to be consistent with my religious beliefs as a Christian. As an evangelical, I would be of the Reformed theological stream of tradition Christian. And so I kind of thought that libertarianism wasn't an option because of that when I came out. But then I came across this little group called the Reformed Libertarians. And there's a Facebook page. Shout out to CJ Engel of the Reformed Libertarian. And also he's started a new magazine called Bastion Magazine. But as I discovered them and I discovered a Facebook group associated with them, I started spending time in there and seeing how the non-aggression principle not only fulfills the qualification of it is not only not contrary to biblical principles, but I think it is actually a biblical principle. It also is a principle that you can build a whole belief system on. And, I know that not everyone listening to this and not everyone following our page is a Christian. And so that part doesn't matter to them, but, that does matter to a lot of people. And we are the Flyover Libertarian podcast. So that sort of thing matters to Flyover Americans, that it not only doesn't contradict, but actually can be proven from biblical principles. And that's kind of in a nutshell how I came to libertarianism.
That's good stuff. And we definitely want to cover the theological component at a later date. I think that'll be of interest to a lot of people. For me, it's almost an embarrassing start, actually, with the 2016 presidential campaign, where I'm looking at one side and I'm going, I'm not a Hillary Clinton. I look at the other side and I'm not a Donald Trump. And so, last resort, oh, well, there's this Gary Johnson out there. What's he about? And I think the Libertarian Party, which can be very unlibertarian sometimes, unfortunately,
Sure.
but I guess the Republican Party can be pretty not conservative in some ways. The Libertarian Party can be very gateway druggish, I guess. It's like libertarian light. And so their catchphrase on their website of, fiscal conservative, socially liberal, emphasizing personal responsibility. I think that's just such a bland, vanilla statement. It really wouldn't, like, who would disagree with that? Like, there's no such thing as a fiscally liberal and a socially conservative person, or at least somebody that
wouldn't that be crazy?
Wouldn't that yeah, it's just the crazy. Like, nobody is the opposite of that. That's just
I want to control literally everything about you.
It's just like they're not disagreeing with anyone with that, but it made for an easy gateway into a third party option there. So kind of dove in during the 2016 election year, which is, I think it got a lot of other people thinking, but unfortunately we still ended up with a two-party choice there.
Yeah.
After that, I think Josh, you got me into Reformed Libertarian. And from there, people just asked some really challenging questions. I remember having a debate about roads one time. It's like, I was that guy. I asked about the roads. I think my hang up was, if all the roads around you are privately owned, what would you do? Like, where would you go?
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't, that's just a pretty uncreative, view of the world. That's something we should talk about later.
I really think that's one thing. Like, every one of us has at one point been the roads guy, like we all sort of like laugh at that guy, but there's something to the fact that like we have all been the who would build the roads guy at some point.
Yeah.
Like it's a joke among us for a reason, because it really is kind of like, but wait a minute, the government runs the roads. How do we have roads? And it becomes really funny to us on the other side, but there is something to the fact that, like, I mean, not a bad question. It's hard to see outside that paradigm.
And when you see the enormously complex systems that emerge from just simple human cooperation and the incentives being aligned correctly, but then you wonder, how would we have roads? It's like you gotta dig in a little deeper there. So I'm glad I dug in deeper. Got into the Tom Woods show. There's some good meat and potatoes in the Tom Woods show.
Oh yeah.
That's he asks some challenging questions. He talks to a variety of people. I enjoy that one a lot. After that, I started reading some good books. I got End of the Fed by Ron Paul. I was in Kansas City for a summer. I actually listened to that on audiobook as I was driving around. They have a Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City, and kind of enjoyed touring it, but then noticing that at the museum of the Federal Reserve Bank, they didn't answer any of the questions that came up in the book.
Right.
They almost give you the impression that they just like print money or something at the museum. It's kind of like, to quote Tom Woods, like, nothing to see here, citizen. Carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah, another highlight would be reading Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson, which just so straightforwardly puts things in front of you, these situations that he can explain where, like, well, obviously if it would work this way, and, if A plus B equals C, then tried hopping straight into Mises, but that was a little too much all at once. It's pretty dry. And then I also, from the media, they'll tell you that Ayn Rand is the libertarian role model. So I attempted to bite off an Ayn Rand book, and quickly realized that she gets some of the what, but almost none of the why that we believe. So would you say that's accurate? Yeah. She gets some of the what, but none of the why?
I've spent an embarrassing little amount of time reading kind of the big works of Ayn Rand. I remember, like, I thought that that's what libertarianism was when I was young, and before I really became principled, and even then, like, I made it through maybe the first chapter or two of Atlas Shrugged, but I was in college. I was pretty busy. I just didn't. I really should. I do want to read that sometime, and that's one of the things that I would say that I most want. I guess I most need to grow in is I don't have firsthand knowledge of a lot of the source material of libertarianism. I've learned a lot from podcasts and stuff like that, and maybe we'll start a book club or something. I would say like a big thing for me. What I read a lot of was there were the Reformed Libertarian page had a 30-day reading list. And I made my way through all of that, and there were some pretty big ones like the Anatomy of the State.
And
then reading also from another really big one was From Aristocracy to Monarchy to Democracy by Hans Hermann Hoppe. That one really opened my eyes to sort of like, it's really true. I dropped this hashtag a lot, but it's really true. Democracy sucks. It's really, really crummy, and it produces some pretty terrible effects. And it's pretty antithetical to liberty. But some of those were some of my big books that, I've been hugely affected by. And then, of course, like you said, in, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt was pretty great. Yeah.
I can't just gloss over the democracy sucks thing. I think that's going to trip some people up.
Democracy sucks.
I always like to clarify it's in a coercive state. Democracy just puts all the wrong incentives forward, especially with a 51%.
It's true. Like, I think about I think one of the, and I don't remember. The truth is, it's been long enough ago that I don't remember if this was someone else's illustration or my own, but I just picture leading someone into a room, and I'm like, all right, here's a table full of food, but you only have 1 hour with it. And after that, I'm taking it all back. Like, you're not going to conserve that food, right? You're just going to chow down as quick as you can, get as much as you can. This, especially if it's really good food, like you're going to want a little bit of everything, maybe stuff your pockets on your way out the door, but if I open the door and I say, here's all the food for you, do what you want with it. Well, maybe you're going to look at it and be like, you know what? I don't really want that, but I know some people who might want it. I can share it with them, or I can sell it to them. I can put a lot of this in the fridge and the freezer, and I can eat for a long time. And I think of that as kind of like the difference between a monarchy and a democracy is, the incentive to plunder quickly is much higher in a democracy than with a monarchy, because monarchy isn't perfect. They're still going to be plundering. They're still going to be selfishly using for their own ends.
Yeah. It's still a coercive state.
They also have to think about their children. Like, my children are going to control this kingdom after I'm done. And it kind of gets to the point of really, libertarianism is fundamentally about self-ownership, private property ownership, and the non-aggression principle. And the closer you get to that second, even among those who violate the non-aggression principle, namely the state, the closer you get to ownership, the better it is. Like, the more the monarchy has to think about, this is my territory, then they are less likely to, maybe not less likely, but there are greater noticeable effects if they do. If they plunder it.
Yeah, and you can point out the shortcomings of democracy by rearranging that incentive structure and going to a monarchy and saying, well, look how this is better in some ways. I wouldn't actually advocate for that just because it's still a coercive state, but it's enlightening to see what would work differently there. You can make the parallel to, like, you're in a church, so make the parallel to a congregationally led church versus an elder led church.
Yeah.
I think your church is elder led, right?
They think they're congregationally led, but they're elder led. I really could not
imagine. But that means it's working. That means it's working right, because they're doing a good job. That's why they think that they're
actually, I would say, like, that's what's interesting. I had actually said this on our page maybe a week ago. I was in conversation with someone, and I had said, like, we were talking about there's a meme that we had posted about public school incidences of sexual molestation versus the church, and it had gotten into sort of this issue of, like, well, I mean, if there's top-down authority with no one checking that authority. And I said, what's ironic is you see that a lot in Baptist churches, which, okay, cards on the table, I'm a Baptist, but you see that in Baptist churches, especially ones that think they're congregationally led, because really what ends up actually happening in congregationally led churches is they have just one guy in charge. It ends up being just an elder led one guy in charge, which may as well be a priesthood, and
it's interesting.
And it really is interesting, because that's actually one of the biggest flaws in democracy is actually what ends up happening is it centralizes power more. And if you want proof of that, look in America, power has become more centralized than even during, like, old monarchy days. Like, I remember listening to a podcast about Baptist history, and there was a story about an old Baptist minister, and they had found a letter from the king to this guy asking for him to lend them money, or a king or a duke or something like that. And so there was this official, officially a member of the state, asking for permission to take money from him, like asking for this pastor or theologian to lend him money. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, there's no way the state would do that. The state would now just take the money. That's what happens in a democracy. Yeah. And then we justify it by being like, well, the government is us, so we've already given them permission because we voted.
Yeah. Oh, you signed a social contract, so it's actually you borrowing money from yourself.
You show me where I signed that, buddy. It's great, but that's a fascinating thing about democracy. But I think it might be fun for our listeners, all 5 of them, to hear about where our page came from, because, I mean, we just crossed 5,000 likes. And that's insane.
With really no effort.
With very minimal effort. We crossed 5,000 likes, and it's insane. And really, we've been kicking around this idea of doing a podcast for a long time, but I think we both felt the pressure once we crossed that 5,000 mark. We're like, all right, let's do something. We've got a brand here. Let's do something. But I think a lot of people would have fun hearing about the story of how it came to be. As he mentioned, as he was beginning to grow in libertarianism, I had been in libertarianism for a few years. And one thing that you have to know about me is that when I get into something, I get into it. I'm not a halfway in kind of guy. I dive right in. And so I dove right into this libertarianism thing. And I had been sharing a lot of memes from my personal page. Now, as I said, in my real life, I'm a pastor. And it's not that I became afraid of people finding out my political views. Like, if they ask me, I tell them. But it more became an issue that, like, how do I say this? It really became more of an issue that it was kind of getting in the way of my doing my work among the church, of preaching the gospel, of caring for people's souls and stuff like that. And so I began thinking, like, is there a way that I could have an outlet for this where I could post political memes, post political thoughts, and not annoy the people who go to my normal Facebook page. And also there was an extent where, like, I didn't want my name to be attached to my politics. I wanted my name to be attached to my other work, my work with, the church. And so I wanted people to think of gospel, and they thought of me. But anyway, I was kind of kicking around this idea. And this is really fun because this story kind of, I think, also says a lot about our relationship. Because I came up with the idea. I thought, it might be cool, like do a Facebook page called the Flyover Libertarian, and share my memes, my thoughts, articles. This is before I really understood the algorithm that articles don't work on a Facebook page. Like, that's why, if you're wondering why we share pictures of articles and then the link in the comments, it's because that's the only way to game the algorithm. But I had this idea for the Flyover Libertarian, and it had so many, I don't know, because I live in Flyover America, and it kind of occurred to me that everyone who espouses libertarianism are pretty much found in the same places. Even as they rail against DC, they're all kind of in the DC area, or the New York area has a lot of libertarians in it, or they're all in Texas, or even in California, or the one hiccup is in Auburn, Alabama, where the Mises Institute is, and they got a lot of people congregated over there. But it seemed like libertarianism is a flyover view. Like, it is a view that gets passed over when it comes to perspectives to speak on issues. We kind of get passed over, and that's not as true anymore, but it has been true for a long time. And it was, especially when I was starting to think about this page. And of course, also I live in Flyover America. I grew up and lived and still live in Iowa, all except for those few short years where I lived in South Dakota. I've been an Iowan all my life. I am from Flyover world. And so anyway, I had shared this idea of a Flyover Libertarian page with the rural Rothbard. And what's funny is I had shared it with him, and I don't remember how much time passed between this time and then, and how many conversations happened between this time and then. But I was on a trip with my youth group. I was at a mission trip sort of thing, conference sort of thing. And I got a message from rural Rothbard saying, "Hey, I set up the page. I'm making you an admin." And I frankly wasn't ready for it. So, but he's just a doer, and so you just kind of went for it, and it was great because that's sort of what you do. You kind of just go for things, and then I have to keep up, and that's great because I'm a thinker. I will think about something forever and never actually do it. And so he set up the page. I'll let him give his perspective on how that whole thing went too.
Yeah, honestly, I barely remember it. I just remember you having this great idea. So, like, we need to do this. Let's go for it. And I was at that naive point still where I didn't know I couldn't do everything at the same time. So I just kind of went for it, and we neglected the page for, I think it's been a couple of years now.
Yeah, I mean, initially,
one day woke up and we got 5,000 people. So we just
initially, it kind of was a slow going. I would say it was just like, the first year was just like a few hundred people.
20 goes to 50 and 50 goes to 100.
And we would jump in kind of small bits, and it was but once it hit 1,000 likes, that's when it really started to snowball a little bit, where we I guess we started figuring out how to do things more.
And honestly, when I think our most rapid growth started when Liberty memes got zucked.
Yes.
And that was just really weird because I was so conflicted, because here's this page with, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of likes they had. And just for no reason at all, good reason at all, removed from Facebook. And we changed our profile picture to spoof that. What was going on there? You have to go to our page and dig back in the profile pictures, but it looked like Liberty Memes' old profile picture. And I think we just started getting more involved, and people started liking. And I was going for a walk. It was in the summer. Right. I was going for a walk, and I just couldn't stay off my phone because all this activity was hitting the page all of a sudden. This otherwise
Yeah.
Dead page.
And it's kind of like, something really interesting and almost magical happened at that point. There was like this one major meme page that was this was the Libertarian meme page. And those guys are great guys. I've interacted with, I don't know which admin he is. I've interacted with one of them a decent amount. He probably has no idea who I am, but I know who he is. And they're great guys, and I think they're still running the page, still doing great things. But when they got zucked that first time, it was like the whole libertarian community started, especially libertarian pages. We started kind of doing things in support of them. And what's fun is it seemed like all the people who liked the Liberty memes page started branching out to the other libertarian meme pages. And, I think,
yeah, it was kind of a Hydra moment.
It was kind of, like that's a good metaphor. Yeah. And especially because I love Marvel Comics. Yeah.
I feel like there's 1,000 libertarian Facebook pages now.
And some of them are,
I feel like there's even like 50 Christian libertarian Facebook pages.
Some of them are okay. Some of them are great. Some of them are like, there's a few pages.
Ooh, we don't do that
There's
here.
a few pages that I'm like, I don't know why they're not a bigger deal. Like I'm just like, these guys are way smarter than we are. And like, there's a few pages that I remember were running when we were just starting and we've passed them in likes. I'm like, why does that make sense? It doesn't, it's kind of become, the whole libertarian online community is kind of growing. It's kind of interesting. We've been going for a little while, but we're gonna bring this to a close. But we kind of wanted to give you an idea of what's going forward. We don't really have a clear idea of how often we're going to be putting out podcasts. It's so probably initially it's going to be somewhat, uneven in our output, because we're just starting to figure this stuff out. But we have some ideas because we're based out of meme pages. We've got some ideas for segments that we would really love to get some crowdsourcing from you guys, our listeners, on. And so here's some ideas that we've got going. Some of them are just things that we're gonna have to prep on our own, but some things that we would love for you to post with or help us with is we have this idea. So Twitter's a weird place, and I've recently become enmeshed in it. I really have started enjoying it. Like it's really just a prime trolling environment. A lot of what do they say? It's a target-rich environment for that. And so one thing, a segment that we thought would be fun and we would love your help on is Meanwhile on Twitter. Twitter especially. I'm sure you can do it on Facebook too, like Meanwhile on Facebook. But especially Twitter, there seems to be an immense amount of stupidity. Like the hot take this week of someone saying that not wearing a coat is toxic masculinity and ego violence, which I thought was a fun little phrase. But if you would like to help us out, on that one, if you could just, whenever you see something just absolutely crazy stupid, either retweet it or reply to it with the hashtag Meanwhile on Twitter. And we will keep an eye on that hashtag. So hashtag Meanwhile on Twitter, or maybe even tag us, either at Flyover Liberta 1, which is my, handle, or at Flyover Liberta 2, which is the rural Rothbard's handle. If you could tag us or, hit that hashtag Meanwhile on Twitter, we'll bring that up on our podcast, and, especially the particularly crazy ones. And if you have anything that you've seen us post in some of our rants or anything like that you would love to hear us speak more about, also, if you could let us know. Just kind of drop a line on our page. I'm sure we're going to be posting this on our page at some point. Either respond with that, like what you would like to hear from us, or something like that. And yeah, with that, I don't really have anything else to say. You got something to say?
Yeah, we might highlight some top fan comments from the page too.
That's a big thing.
Be sure to
get your game up. Like I've noticed that our fan page or our page has some of the funniest fans. Some of y'all are a little crazy, and we love you, but you're crazy. But
some of you are too much.
But some of you,
Wakanda, we don't do that here.
But some of you are really funny, and we're going to be highlighting some of the best comments in upcoming podcasts.
Well, this has been the Flyover Libertarian Podcast. I'm the Rural Rothbard, and that's Iowa and Cap.